Kwesi had always been the life of the party in Accra's thriving photography scene. His career was taking off, and his skill behind the camera earned him high-profile gigs. However, beneath the surface, there was a side of him that only he knew. He had a secret obsession with women's underwear. Over time, he convinced himself that each piece he collected gave him control over the woman who wore it, a power that made him feel invincible. He believed the more intimate the garment, the stronger his influence. Kwesi had always been careful to keep this ritual hidden from his friends and colleagues. His professional life was flawless, but the private world he'd built for himself in the shadows was starting to feel more like an addiction. It wasn't just the women he dated, but also his photo shoots and encounters with his clients, each offering up a piece of their clothing to further his growing collection. At first, it felt harmless, but deep down, Kwesi knew that his obsession was slowly consuming him. Still, he couldn't stop. The more garments he possessed, the more power he felt. Little did he know, that feeling of control would soon come with terrifying consequences. Kwesi's next target was his boss's daughter, Akojua. She was an enigmatic beauty, often seen around the studio, her graceful presence leaving a lasting impression on everyone she met. Akojua's charm was magnetic, but it was her reserved, untouchable aura that intrigued Kwesi the most. She rarely interacted with the staff, preferring to remain in the background, yet her quiet confidence drew Kwesi's attention. He was determined to photograph her in a way no one ever had, capturing her essence through his lens. During their photo shoot, he made sure to keep the atmosphere professional, but his eyes were constantly drawn to her elegance, her poise. It wasn't long before Kwesi's mind began to race. He began to fantasize about owning a piece of her, something that would make him feel closer to her in a way no photo ever could. By the end of the shoot, he found a way to take something personal, Akojua's lace underwear that had accidentally fallen from her bag. The thrill that surged through him was undeniable. He had finally added her to his collection, but he didn't realize how far-reaching the consequences of his actions would soon become. It didn't take long for strange things to begin happening after Kwesi added Akojua's underwear to his collection. The first incident was subtle but unsettling. The morning after, Kwesi received an urgent call from his boss. Akojua had been involved in a car accident, but miraculously, she emerged with only a few scratches. The whole studio was in shock, but what bothered Kwesi most was the eerie sense that something deeper was at play. He couldn't help but feel responsible. As the days passed, more unusual events seemed to surround Akojua. Her once thriving career started to unravel. She was passed over for a major promotion at her company, and rumors about her personal life began circulating. Kwesi couldn't escape the nagging feeling that his actions, in some twisted way, were linked to her misfortunes. The sense of power he once felt from controlling her with the underwear quickly faded into guilt. Yet, he tried to rationalize it. After all, it was just a piece of clothing. It wasn't supposed to have this much of an effect. But as each day passed, the consequences became harder to ignore. Kwesi began to notice a disturbing pattern in his life. After Akojua's accident, more women in his life began experiencing similar misfortunes. A fellow photographer he had once dated found herself entangled in a financial scandal that nearly ruined her business. A model he had briefly worked with suffered a mysterious illness that left her hospitalized for weeks. Each event seemed unrelated, yet there was a strange synchronicity that made Kwesi's skin crawl. It was only when Kwesi revisited his collection, his shrine to control, that he realized the depth of his actions. Each garment he had taken seemed to come with a cost, and the women who had unknowingly given him their pieces of clothing were suffering. The guilt gnawed at him, but it was compounded by a sense of powerlessness. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't reverse the damage. Worse, he felt that with each garment, his hold on the women in his life grew stronger. But it wasn't just their lives he was manipulating. He was also slowly losing control of his own. One night, as Kwesi sat alone in his studio, surrounded by his camera gear and the growing collection of women's underwear, he heard a voice. It was soft at first, like a whisper in the wind, but as the moments passed, it grew clearer. A woman's voice, though unfamiliar, called out to him. At first, Kwesi thought he was imagining things. Too many sleepless nights, too much stress. But the voice continued, growing louder and more insistent. The voice spoke of retribution, warning Kwesi that the spirits he had summoned through his ritual were not easily dismissed. They were ancient and vengeful, and they would not let go of the pieces he had taken so recklessly. At first, Kwesi thought it was just a figment of his guilt. But as the voice grew stronger, he realized that something far darker was at work. The spirits had awakened, and now they were demanding a price. Kwesi's obsession had led him into a spiritual trap, one he couldn't escape without facing the consequences of his actions. The price of control was no longer just the misfortune of the women he targeted, it was his very soul. Kwesi's nights were now filled with restless dreams. Each dream was vivid and disturbing, showing him the suffering of the women whose underwear he had collected. In one, a Kojua was trapped in a room, screaming for help as the walls closed in around her. In another, a model he had worked with was sinking into a pit of darkness, her body contorted in agony. With every dream, the weight of his guilt grew heavier, and the spirits' voices grew louder. Desperate to understand what was happening, Kwesi sought out a spiritual healer in Accra. The healer, an elderly woman with a reputation for resolving dark matters, listened patiently to his story. She told him that his obsession had awakened a curse that bound the spirits of the women he had wronged. These spirits would never rest until he made things right. But the path to redemption wasn't easy. Kwesi would have to return every piece of clothing he had taken, apologize to each woman, and undo the spiritual damage he had caused. The healer warned him that the spirits would not forgive him easily, and if he failed, there would be no turning back. Kwesi's journey to undo the harm he had caused began with a decision: to return the underwear he had taken from a Kojua. He knew this would be the hardest step, not just because of the powerful connection he felt to her garment, but because he wasn't sure how she would react to his confession. He tracked her down, nervously rehearsing the apology he had never expected to make. The guilt weighed heavily on him as he approached her apartment. A Kojua greeted him coldly, unaware of the dark ritual Kwesi had invoked. He stumbled over his words, confessing the truth about what he had done. At first, she didn't believe him. But when he presented the lace underwear, her face paled, and for a moment, it seemed like the world stopped moving. Akojua's anger was palpable, but there was also a sadness in her eyes. She asked him to leave. But before he could go, she gave him a warning. If you think returning this will make everything right, think again. Kwesi left, unsure if he had done enough to lift the curse, but certain that his journey had only just begun. Returning the underwear to a Kojua was only the beginning. Kwesi knew there were many more women whose lives had been upended by his actions. His next challenge was to confront each one and seek their forgiveness. Some would never understand, others would be too angry to listen, but Kwesi had no choice. The spirits were relentless, and his every step seemed haunted by their presence. Each apology was harder than the last. Some women refused to speak to him, while others demanded more than just words. The guilt that had once been a shadow over his life now consumed him entirely. But with every piece of clothing returned, the weight on his soul began to lessen. He felt as though he was undoing the damage, but the spirits were not satisfied. They were still watching, waiting for him to complete the process, or else. As Kwesi continued his journey of atonement, he began to realize the true cost of redemption. Each woman's forgiveness came with a price, and some were more demanding than others. One woman required him to perform an act of public humiliation to prove his sincerity, while another insisted that he sever all ties with his photography career, the very thing that had once defined his identity. Kwesi was beginning to understand that redemption wasn't just about returning the garments, it was about reshaping his entire way of life. The spirits that had once whispered promises of power and control were now growing increasingly impatient. Though Kwesi had taken the first steps to right his wrongs, the spirits demanded deeper sacrifices. They wanted more than just gestures. They wanted him to surrender his pride, his ambitions, and his old self. The rituals that had once made him feel powerful now felt like shackles, binding him to a path of relentless reckoning. Every act of atonement peeled away a layer of his ego, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. One evening, after yet another grueling act of penance, Kwesi sat alone, questioning if he would ever feel truly free from the grip of the spirits. Redemption, he realized, would not come easily, and he wondered if he would have the strength to give up everything he once held dear for the sake of forgiveness. As Kwesi made his way through the list of women, his mental and physical state continued to deteriorate. Shadows seemed to linger in every corner, and at night, he felt the presence of the spirits closing in. One evening, as he prepared to meet a former model, he felt a chilling touch on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw nothing but his own reflection in the window, yet he could hear faint whispers echoing in his mind. These encounters grew more frequent, reminding him that the spirits were always near, watching and waiting for him to complete his penance. Yeah, the model he was meeting had once been his muse, and their brief relationship had ended on a sour note. Seeing her again reminded him of the carelessness with which he had treated women as objects. When he handed back the garment he had taken from her, she looked at him with disdain, but a hint of pity softened her expression. "You're haunted," she said, as if she could see the torment he bore. Kwesi left her, realizing that each woman's forgiveness might lessen the curse but would not free him entirely. The spirits demanded something greater, and he feared he wasn't strong enough to face it. Kwesi's encounters with the women he wronged were growing more painful. He had to admit his darkest secrets, confront his shame, and accept their anger. Each time, he felt more vulnerable, stripped of the bravado and confidence he once carried so easily. As he returned more garments, his spirit grew heavier, and the whispers of the spirits intensified. It was clear that simple apologies were not enough. He would need to sacrifice more of himself to make amends. One woman, Amina, asked him to give up the studio where he worked, a demand that hit him deeply. The studio was his life, his place of success and artistry, and the thought of abandoning it felt like losing his identity. But he had no choice. Amina told him that until he was willing to give up everything, he would remain bound by the curse he had cast upon himself. Reluctantly, Kwesi began the painful process of severing his ties to the studio, slowly understanding that redemption meant surrendering his pride and his career. As the curse tightened its hold, Kwesi's nightmares grew worse. Each night, he dreamt of the women he had wronged, surrounded by dark, faceless figures who whispered of retribution. Desperate and fearing for his sanity, he sought out the spiritual healer again, the same woman who had warned him of the spirits' wrath. This time, she told him something even more chilling. The spirits were no longer satisfied with his gestures of repentance. They demanded a sacrifice, something of great importance to him, in exchange for the suffering he had caused. The healer told him to prepare himself for a journey into the spirit world, where he would face each woman's pain in order to understand the true impact of his actions. It was a dangerous ritual, one that could take his life if he faltered. Despite the risk, Kwesi agreed. He realized that redemption would come at a high cost, and if he wanted peace, he would have to pay it. With the healer's guidance, Kwesi entered the spirit world, a shadowy realm filled with the voices of the women he had wronged. In this realm, he felt the weight of their pain, an agony that clawed at his heart and soul. He saw each woman standing before him, their faces twisted in expressions of betrayal and sorrow. Their emotions poured into him, overwhelming his senses, and for the first time, he understood the gravity of his actions. Each spirit delivered its own message, and Kwesi was forced to endure their words, feeling the emotional torment he had inflicted upon them. As he faced each woman's spirit, the intensity of his regret grew. He had never imagined that his actions could cause such suffering. By the time he returned to the healer's hut, he was exhausted, his body trembling, his mind shattered. Yet, he knew that the spirits were not finished with him. They still demanded more. The healer informed Kwesi that in order to truly break the curse, he needed to let go of his pride completely. She instructed him to give a public apology to each of the women he had wronged, a gesture that would demonstrate his genuine remorse. Kwesi had spent his life hiding behind a facade of confidence, and the thought of exposing his darkest secrets to the world filled him with dread. Yet, he had no choice. His desire for freedom from the spirit's wrath overpowered his fear of shame. Kwesi organized a gathering and invited each woman he had wronged, along with his closest friends and colleagues. When the day arrived, he stood before them, visibly shaken. He admitted to his sins, his obsession, and the harm he had caused. As he spoke, he felt the weight of his actions lifting slightly, replaced by a deep sorrow for the pain he had inflicted. While some women accepted his apology, others turned away in disgust. Kwesi left the gathering feeling hollow, yet strangely lighter, as if he was beginning to let go of the curse. That night, Kwesi received another message from the spirits, this time in a dream that felt more real than ever. The spirits told him that his journey was nearing its end, but that the final step would require a sacrifice he was unprepared to make. He would need to relinquish the one thing he held most dear, something that symbolized his pride and status in the world: his camera. The spirits showed him visions of his past, moments of joy and triumph in his career, each tied to the camera that had been his source of success. Without it, he felt he would be nothing, just a man without a talent to define him. But he knew he had no other option. The spirits demanded it, and if he refused, they would continue to haunt him forever. With a heavy heart, Kwesi decided to part with his camera. It was his most prized possession, the tool that had defined his identity and brought him success. Selling it felt like tearing a part of himself away, yet he knew that holding on to it would mean continuing to live under the spirit's curse. He donated the camera to a young aspiring photographer, hoping that its legacy could continue in someone else's hands, someone who would use it with respect. As he watched the young photographer walk away with his camera, Kwesi felt a sense of relief. It was as if a burden had been lifted from his soul. But even as he tried to embrace his sacrifice, he knew that the final test was still ahead. The spirits had shown him mercy, but they had not yet released him completely. Kwesi's sacrifice earned him temporary peace, but the spirits appeared one last time, telling him that he would need to make amends by dedicating his life to helping others. The path forward required him to live selflessly, supporting those he had wronged and aiding women in need throughout Accra. Kwesi understood the depth of his punishment and accepted it, realizing that redemption was a lifelong journey. The spirits faded, leaving him with a newfound clarity. He knew that he would never fully escape his past, but he had been given a chance to reshape his future. And so, Kwesi set out to honor the spirit's command, dedicating himself to the cause of empowering and respecting the women he once thought he could control. With the spirit's command weighing heavily on his heart, Kwesi started seeking ways to fulfill his promise. He began by volunteering at a local women's shelter in Accra, where he encountered stories of hardship, resilience, and survival. Each woman he met reminded him of those he had wronged, and he saw his own past actions reflected in the struggles they endured. This realization deepened his resolve. For the first time, he felt genuine compassion and empathy, qualities he had long suppressed in his quest for control. Kwesi spent his days helping women find employment, housing, and emotional support. He shared his photography skills, offering free portrait sessions to help them feel empowered. In the smiles of these women, he found a sense of fulfillment that his old life had never given him. Each day, he grew closer to feeling whole, though he knew his journey was far from over. One afternoon, as Kwesi was finishing up at the shelter, he ran into Afia, one of the first women he had manipulated through his ritual. She was shocked to see him and immediately confronted him, asking why he was there and what he hoped to gain. Kwesi was prepared for this encounter. He had rehearsed his apology countless times, but nothing could have prepared him for the raw emotions that surfaced as he faced her. Afia's words were harsh but true, cutting into the shame and guilt he carried. She told him about the setbacks and misfortunes she had endured after their relationship, indirectly influenced by his twisted beliefs. Kwesi listened, humbled by her pain, and finally offered a heartfelt apology. Afia, though skeptical of his intentions, accepted his remorse. That night, Kwesi felt a renewed determination to make amends, knowing that forgiveness was something he would need to earn, not ask for. As Kwesi continued working with the women at the shelter, he realized that to truly help them, he would need to rebuild trust, both in himself and from others. His new role as a mentor became an opportunity to heal the parts of himself that he had damaged through years of selfishness and control. With each woman he helped, he felt a piece of his own spirit returning to him, free from the hold of the spirits that had once haunted him. One of the women, Amma, shared her struggles with Kwesi and expressed how lost she felt. Seeing a reflection of his past self in her vulnerability, Kwesi knew he had to offer guidance without any expectation. He provided support and encouragement, understanding that trust had to be earned one small gesture at a time. This humility became a foundation for his growth, as he realized that true power lay in compassion rather than control. Kwesi's progress was soon put to the test when a powerful temptation arose. He received an offer to work on a high-profile photography project that could potentially relaunch his career. The opportunity was alluring, and for a moment, he wondered if he could balance his new life with his old ambitions. But as he reflected on his journey, he realized that returning to his past would mean risking everything he had gained in his pursuit of redemption. Reluctantly, Kwesi declined the offer, understanding that he couldn't compromise the progress he'd made. The satisfaction he felt in helping others was more fulfilling than any fame or fortune could offer. By turning down the job, he reaffirmed his commitment to the spirit's command, feeling that he was finally breaking free from the chains of his former life. Only one woman remained whom Kwesi had yet to make amends with, his boss's daughter, Akojua, whose life he had affected most profoundly. Kwesi knew this would be his hardest encounter yet, as his actions had disrupted not only her life but also her family's trust. Summoning all his courage, he arranged a meeting with her, prepared to confess his wrongdoings and offer his deepest apology. Akojua arrived guarded, her expression a mixture of hurt and anger. Kwesi spoke sincerely, revealing every detail of his past actions and the misguided beliefs that had led him to hurt her. His confession left him vulnerable, as he offered her the choice of forgiveness or condemnation. After a tense silence, Akojua forgave him but warned that he would need to continue proving his change through his actions. Though her forgiveness was conditional, it gave Kwesi hope that he was moving closer to freeing himself completely. That night, the spirits visited Kwesi in a dream one last time. They acknowledged the sacrifices he had made, his humility, and his dedication to helping others. They told him that his journey of redemption would continue, as true transformation was a lifelong process. With their final blessing, the spirits lifted the curse from him, releasing the last remnants of their hold on his life. Kwesi awoke with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Though he still bore the memories of his past, the spirit's presence was gone. He knew he was now free to forge a future built on respect, humility, and love for others. With the curse lifted, Kwesi returned to the shelter with a renewed sense of purpose. He began organizing community events to celebrate the resilience of the women he worked with, using his photography skills to capture their strength and beauty. These images became symbols of empowerment, displayed in galleries across Accra, raising awareness of the women's stories and challenges. Kwesi had found a way to honor his passion for photography without compromising his morals. His work became a beacon of hope, proving that he had genuinely changed. As his reputation grew, he was invited to speak at events, where he shared his journey openly, hoping his story would deter others from following the path he once took. Kwesi decided to establish a foundation to support women's empowerment, using the funds he had once earned through selfish pursuits to give back to the community. The foundation offered scholarships, job training, and resources for women to build better lives. Kwesi dedicated himself to creating opportunities for others, determined to leave behind a legacy of compassion rather than control. His foundation gained the support of influential figures across Accra, and Kwesi began to see the impact of his efforts firsthand. The women he helped inspired him to keep going, reminding him that redemption was more than an apology, it was a continuous commitment to doing better. As Kwesi transformed, he reconnected with his estranged family, who had distanced themselves during his darkest days. Though their relationship had been strained, they saw the genuine change in him and began to open their hearts again. This renewed connection reminded Kwesi of the importance of family and support, values he had once ignored. Kwesi's family became his greatest support, encouraging him to continue his work and holding him accountable. Their presence brought him comfort, reinforcing the idea that he was no longer alone in his journey. This rekindling of family ties became one of the most precious aspects of his transformation. Kwesi began mentoring young photographers, sharing not only his technical skills but also the ethical responsibilities that came with power and influence. He spoke openly about the mistakes he had made, hoping that his transparency would inspire others to avoid the pitfalls he had faced. His teachings extended beyond photography as he emphasized respect for others, humility, and empathy. Kwesi found fulfillment in guiding others, realizing that his journey could now serve as a beacon of change for future generations. His legacy would be one of growth, learning, and understanding rather than dominance. Years passed, and Kwesi continued his work quietly, finding joy in helping others rather than seeking recognition. He had finally achieved a sense of inner peace, a calmness he had once believed was unattainable. Every action he took felt purposeful, driven by a desire to uplift others rather than himself. In moments of reflection, he felt grateful for the Spirit's intervention, for without it, he would never have discovered the beauty of living a life dedicated to others. Kwesi knew his journey had been arduous, but the man he had become was a testament to the power of transformation. On the anniversary of his foundation, Kwesi organized a celebration to honor the women who had inspired him and those who had forgiven him. The event drew people from all over Accra, and as he watched the room fill with laughter and joy, he felt a sense of fulfillment beyond words. His work had come full circle, symbolizing the redemption he had worked so hard to achieve. Kwesi took a moment to thank everyone in attendance, reflecting on his journey. He acknowledged the pain he had caused and the sacrifices he had made, expressing gratitude for the chance to change. The celebration became a milestone in his life, marking a new chapter of peace and unity. As Kwesi looked back on his life, he felt immense gratitude for the journey that had led him to redemption. His foundation continued to thrive, helping countless women and creating lasting change. Kwesi's legacy had transformed from one of selfishness to one of compassion, proving that even the darkest pasts could be redeemed. Though he would never forget his mistakes, He chose to focus on the future he was building, one filled with love, respect, and humility. Kwesi knew that he had finally become the man he was meant to be. A man who had learned the true value of control was in letting go, embracing love, and living a life dedicated to the well-being of others. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Kindly share, subscribe, and hit the bell button for more stories like this.